Hey guys, and welcome back, or if you're tuning in for the first time, welcome. Today I've got a very important story to share with you. The story of a woman called Lauren DeMolo who disappeared just under a year ago in June 2020. Her family is still desperately searching for her and are trying to spread her story far and wide in the hopes it will put pressure on the local police to do more to help. And of course there's the obvious point that the more people hear about her story, the more likely the right person is to hear her story. The person who might have that one piece of information that provides some answers. There's no denying that the circumstances around this disappearance are baffling, and there's no straightforward answer here. I was actually introduced to Lauren's case when I received an email from Caitlin Boddy, a co-host of Complicit, a true mystery podcast about Lauren's case. They've been with the case since the beginning and have worked closely alongside Lauren's friends and family throughout everything. The podcast features plenty of interviews with the people closest to the case, and because of this, they've been able to dive deeper than any other media platforms have been able to. I feel like this sounds like I'm doing an ad. This is not an ad. They've just asked me to share Lauren's story on my own platform, but I will be using the podcast as my main source of information for this video because they've got more than anyone else. They know everything there is to know publicly about this case. And whilst I am going to be giving a detailed overview of the case in this video, of course, it is probably going to be under an hour long and therefore nowhere near as in-depth as the 3.5-ish hours of content the Complicit podcast has. I'll link Complicit and their website down below and would highly recommend going and checking it out to listen to what Lauren's own friends and families have to say in regards to her case. Lauren DeMolo disappeared from her home in Cape Coral, Florida on the 19th of June 2020, aged just 29 years old. There were some very strange things that happened in the lead up to Lauren's disappearance, and I think it's safe to say that she definitely didn't have the easiest of lives. She had her struggles, and there's a lot to consider here when trying to figure out what happened to her. But I'll begin with the very basics. As I said, Lauren was last seen on the 19th of June 2020, known to be at her home on Coronado Parkway in Cape Coral, Florida. She was officially reported as missing on 21st of June 2020 and is currently classed as missing and endangered. She was 29 years old when she went missing, but she would be 30 now. She is 5 foot tall, 110 pounds with brown eyes and naturally light brown hair. It seems she always had it bleached blonde but recently reverted to her natural colour as far as I can tell. She has 3 unique tattoos: Namaste written along the entire right side of her torso, NY on her pelvis standing for New York, and rosary beads on her ankle. Her family say that she's a bright, bubbly person who always saw the best in people. Her father Paul has said to NBC2.com, "She always saw the best in people, she never judged anyone. Now, maybe she should have." Her family admit that she wasn't a perfect person, but she was a free spirit, loving towards everyone she met. She was close with her family and was hardworking. Until recently she'd been working 2 jobs. Everyone seems to agree that Lauren always had a smile on her face. Lauren Brittany DeMolo was born on the 14th of July 1990 and grew up in New York. After a custody agreement gave Paul, her father, full custody of Lauren and her sister Cassie, they remained in New York whilst their mother moved down to Florida. It seems they lost touch and Lauren didn't end up talking with her mum in 11 years, but in her early 20s decided it was time to reconnect with her family. Not only her mother but the rest of her siblings, she had 2 half-sisters and a half-brother living down in Florida too. So Lauren decided to pack up her life in Staten Island and move down to Cape Coral, where her mum and brother lived. Cape Coral is an interesting kind of place. It's the 8th largest city in Florida and is basically its own little island located in Lee County on the Gulf of Mexico. It has 400 miles of canals and is bordered on the south and east by the Caloosahatchee River. Although Florida does have a reputation for being the place you go to retire in the sun, Cape Coral had an unusually young population. As of 2018, more than 60% of the population were between the ages of 15 and 64, with residents under 25 outnumbering residents over 65. You can see why Lauren might have chosen this place to call home. However, the city, as with so many others, had an issue with drugs, opioids particularly, and Lauren wasn't the first person to go missing here. But before Lauren, the lead detective on her case had never failed to locate a missing person. I feel like this might be a good time to tell you about the main people I'm going to be mentioning in this story, as there are a lot of names and I want to save confusion, although I won't blame you if you do still get confused. It can be hard to keep up sometimes. As we've covered, Lauren grew up with her father Paul and her full sister Cassie. The Complicit podcast doesn't share Lauren's mother's real name, and instead they refer to her simply as Anne, so I'm going to do the same here. So for the point of this video, Lauren's mother is called Anne. Anne had been with her partner Victor for 15 years, so he would become somewhat of a stepfather figure in Lauren's life. And then there were Lauren's 3 half-siblings, children from another one of Anne's marriages, not Victor's children. The half-siblings I'll be mentioning in this video are Lindsay and Jeffrey. Then there's Gabriel, or Gabby, who Lauren had been dating for a number of years. He was close friends with Victor and 14 years Lauren's senior, but they'd been dating for 4 years at the time of her disappearance. And finally there's Michaela, Lauren's daughter. Lauren did not have custody of now 6-year-old Michaela, who was instead being cared for by her paternal grandmother, and that's for reasons I'll get into in just a moment. Michaela's dad was not Gabby, it was simply an ex-boyfriend of Lauren's. I've put up a family tree on screen now for those of you who are watching this on YouTube, but if you're listening to this via my podcast, you can find the family tree on complicit-podcast.com underneath Who's Who. Hopefully you won't need it if I've done a good enough job of explaining here, but it's nice to have a visual, I know. I think the best way to tackle this case is to begin chronologically, so let's take a look at Lauren's life in the years before she disappeared. As I mentioned, she grew up in Staten Island, New York, and as a teenager she was involved in a car accident, for which she was given opioids to manage the back pain she got as a result. As happens all too often, the prescribed opioids soon turned into a full-blown drug addiction, heroin addiction. She was introduced to opioids at a young age and was likely predisposed anyway to addiction. Her mother was an alcoholic. For years Lauren battled addiction. She was in and out of recovery programs, which until recently never really stuck. She was using drugs at the time she met Michaela's father and got pregnant by him. And she lost custody of Michaela when she was first born, but then she joined a recovery program, building up to getting custody while she was in the program. For her daughter, Lauren managed to get clean following all of the step programs, going to AA and NA. She put in the work to care for her daughter, but sadly, soon after she finished the program, she ended up moving back to Cape Coral and started using again. Michaela was then taken away in 2018 and her paternal grandmother was given custody, who still has her today. But this seemed to be the wake-up call that Lauren needed, and by the time she disappeared last June, she'd been clean for 2 whole years. She was attending all of the meetings, doing random drug tests, and finally seemed to be completely off drugs. Her entire purpose in life became all about getting her daughter back. It was a goal that she was constantly working towards, and she would go and visit Michaela often. Michaela's grandmother, though, seemed to have other ideas and was going to fight tooth and nail to keep Michaela with her. I mean, it's a really difficult one because Lauren had clearly worked really hard to get herself clean. She turned her life around and wanted to raise her daughter. From the information I have, nobody is a villain in this story. It just seems like everyone had Michaela's best interests at heart and wanted to do what was right for her. As far as everyone knows, at the time of her disappearance, Lauren was not on drugs and there's no reason to think that she was. She was in a relationship at the time though, as I mentioned earlier, with Gabriel Pina, who was just known to everyone as Gabby. The two had been together for 4 years at the time of Lauren's disappearance, so it was a well-established relationship, although not always easy it seems. Despite being together for so many years, some friends and family members of Lauren's report never having met Gabby. I mean, her own father didn't even know about the relationship until they'd been together for 2 years. Lauren would post on Facebook about their date nights, about how good the relationship was, showing a highlight reel of the best times, as people do on social media. But apparently every time the bills for their apartment needed paying, Gabby would suddenly disappear, leaving Lauren to take the hit. He wasn't a reliable partner, but it seems that wasn't the worst of it. One of Lauren's friends, Erica, told the Complicit podcast that on the 22nd of May 2020, Gabby had beaten Lauren. Lauren said this was the first time it ever happened, but it later came out that was not the case. It had happened before. And not just with Lauren. Gabby had had a criminal record featuring domestic violence with previous partners and assault. Lots of people describe Lauren and Gabby's relationship as very on again, off again. They seem to be constantly breaking up and getting back together, the same pattern happening again and again. And each time Lauren and Gabby would break up, she would turn to another man, Carl Crowe. No one really knows when Carl and Lauren met, but as with Gabby, Carl was a number of years older than Lauren, and he also had a criminal record. But apparently Lauren would tell friends that she felt safe when she was with him. It's why she always went back to him. In April 2020, a young woman called Kaylee Massot was found dead on the side of a road in Gator Circle, Cape Coral. Her cause of death was determined to be a drug overdose, and it was an accident. However, she hadn't died in the place that she was found. The investigation led to the eventual arrest in May of 3 people, including Carl, who was arrested on charges of tampering with evidence, mishandling human remains, and failure to report death. Kaylee had died from an overdose at a party, and Carl went to lengths to hide his involvement in this. Instead of reporting the death, he hid it from the authorities. So Lauren's romantic life was volatile to say the least. She didn't have the best taste in men. But that seems to be the opposite of who Lauren seemed to be as a person. Lauren's a big believer in positive energy, the kind of person who always has a smile on their face, a vibrant person. She never judged anyone. Each day she would start with a walk down the block to the local Four Freedoms Park, where she would sit and do some meditation. Meditation was essential to who Lauren was as a person. She believed in it, it brought her peace. In fact, she believed in the mindset so much that she got the word Namaste tattooed down the side of her torso. And people say that she actually formed another sense. She was so in tune with herself. She didn't drive, so she walked everywhere, and that seems to be how she liked it. It seems like a contradiction for chill, meditative Lauren to be in such volatile relationships. But as her father Paul said to Complicit, she was naive and she trusted people too much. She saw the best in people. A big turning point in Lauren's life came when she discovered that she was pregnant once again. But she wasn't sure who the father was. It could have been either of the men, Carl or Gabby. According to Complicit, neither man wanted her to have an abortion, but Lauren simply wasn't in a place to raise another child. She was focusing all of her energy on getting Michaela back. Her relationship with Gabby was bad, and regardless of all that, wasn't in a financial position to have another kid. She decided that the best thing to do was to end the pregnancy, which she went through with on the 22nd of May, without the support of Gabby, despite him saying he would come and help pay for the procedure. Soon again after that, he laid hands on her. Paul urged Lauren to press charges, but she didn't, and actually stayed with him. They were back in the on stage of their relationship, it seems. But then, in the weeks after the abortion, something odd happened to Lauren. She started to act strange and erratic concerning those closest to her. Paul, Cassie and his sister Lindsay didn't live nearby, so they didn't see this behaviour firsthand, but it was very concerning to Gabby, Victor, Anne and her brother Jeffrey, who lived with Anne. Lauren wasn't acting at all like herself. On one occasion, she was even seen meditating on her front lawn, whilst maintenance just mowed the lawn around her, but she refused to move. She kept saying that she was scared something bad was going to happen, which you probably would say was paranoia, except something bad clearly did happen to her. On the 1st of June, Lauren walked into her mother's home and left a letter and photo on the dining room table before walking out again, not saying a word. The photo was of Lauren and Michaela, and the note read, "Michaela, Mummy loves you so much. I'm sorry I wasn't the mum you deserve, but you mean the world to me. You're my only reason for life, and without you, I have no life. You're my heart and soul, and I'll always be with you even when I'm not. You're my angel baby, and now I'll be your angel, always watching over you and always in your heart. I love you, Mum." As you can imagine, this note caused some of Lauren's loved ones to panic, and Cassie even reached out to the police because she couldn't get hold of her. But Lauren hadn't been AWOL long enough for them to do anything. The letter reads as a suicide note, or at least that's the obvious implication to take from it. But could it also be that Lauren just thought something bad was going to happen to her? It seems that that could have been the case, as from there, Lauren headed across the street to the Four Freedoms Park, which was opposite Anne and Victor's place and only a block away from her own apartment. Soon the police received a report of a woman, Lauren, acting erratically at the park. She said that people were after her. She was talking about aliens and hearing voices, saying that if she didn't kill herself, then the world was going to implode. Someone called the police when they saw her jumping into the water at the park, a kind of lake. When the police arrived, she swam away from them to avoid capture, but she was eventually detained once they got her out of the water. From there, she was held under the Baker Act, Florida's Mental Health Act, which allows doctors, mental health professionals, judges and law enforcement to commit a person to a mental health treatment centre for up to 72 hours if they show signs that they might harm themselves or others. However, Lauren ended up being held for much longer than the standard 72 hours. She was released a whole week later on Monday, 8th of June. While she was in the centre, she hit her head multiple times, having to be transferred to hospital and back. The strangest thing is, before this episode, Lauren had never shown any signs of mental illness like that before. This was completely out of character for her. It's not thought at all that she was on drugs at the time. She had been sober for quite a while by this point, and they did test her in the treatment centre, but this was about 48 hours after she'd been captured, so they can't be 100% sure that she wasn't on anything at the time. The episode was actually thought to have been a rare side effect of the abortion that she'd had over a week prior, a hormone imbalance. Although the research around this is very cloudy, as is so often the case with anything related to the female reproductive system, there is thought to be a link between abortion and mental health. Psychosis is rare and kind of argued against in medical circles, but it's not impossible. It happens, and it seems to have happened to Lauren. Upon leaving the Baker Act hold, Lauren was given a prescription for antipsychotics, which was taken to a pharmacy but was never collected. According to interviews on the podcast, Gabby was supposed to go and pick up the medication and ensure it got given to Lauren. He was even given money by Victor to ensure that he picked up, but he never did, and as a result, you can guess what happened next. On the 14th of June, Lindsay received a very odd 6 AM phone call from Lauren after having a few days of normal behaviour. And then the next day, Gabby called Paul to tell him that he'd gotten home from work and Lauren was talking about aliens and demons and people being out to get her. She was hearing voices. Strangely, this was the first time that Gabby ever called Paul, whilst Anne and Victor were living just down the road, a few minutes walk away. It seems to me that they were no longer interested in dealing with Lauren's mental health anymore, so Gabby called Paul. Something was clearly not right with Lauren once again, and they still hadn't picked up her antipsychotic medication from the pharmacy. So Paul pushed Gabby to call the police and get her Baker Acted again if he thought that she was a danger to herself, which he did. On June 18th, Lauren was released from her second Baker Act hold, and it seems that things were kind of immediately back to business for her. There's surveillance footage of Lauren in the morning at a Speedway gas station less than half a mile away from her home, where she was applying for a job as a clerk. The video shows her laughing and smiling with the clerk on duty, and this is the last known video of Lauren before her disappearance. Although she did have a phone call with her sister Cassie that evening, in which they talked about the search for work. As I mentioned earlier in the video, Lauren had 2 jobs. She worked as a waitress as far as I can see, but due to circumstances and the COVID-19 pandemic, she'd found herself unemployed, so she was determined to find something new. She'd spent quite a lot of time that day searching for jobs. Cassie and Lauren chatted about the situation and they made loose plans to talk again the next day. Also on the Thursday, a maintenance worker at her apartment complex would later say that he had a chat with her that afternoon. Apparently she asked him if he knew of any cheap apartments in the area, as she needed to get out of a bad situation. Knowing what we know, we can assume that the bad situation may have been her relationship with Gabby, who she lived with, but we don't know that for sure, and we're just taking the maintenance worker's word for what was said. Apparently Lauren also had a similar conversation with a friend in which she said she needed to get out of the relationship. Her family would find it strange that she was looking at other apartments though, as she'd only just paid her rent in full. But then on the 19th of June 2020, Lauren disappeared. Earlier in the video, I mentioned how Lauren's daily routine was to head to the park, meditate around 8 AM each morning, and it seems that the 19th was no exception. It would also later transpire that the last activity on her phone was a video call to Gabby at 10 AM that day, and then nothing more. Strangely, he denies ever receiving that call, and of course there's a possibility that that call could have been made by anyone with access to her phone, not just Lauren. Gabby says the last time he saw her was the morning of the 19th, when he kissed her goodbye before going out, but none of her other loved ones would speak to her that day. The same maintenance worker I mentioned just a moment ago would later say that he saw Lauren on the Friday morning around 8:30 AM walking towards her apartment from the direction of Four Freedoms Park. He said that she was wearing a burgundy shirt, a white cover-up, shorts, and was carrying a black bag. At 10 PM that night, Paul, Lauren's father, received a call from Gabby in which he said that Lauren hadn't arrived home yet. Paul told Gabby to call Anne and let her know, as he was in California at the time and there was little he could do to help the situation. Anne and Victor lived only 2 blocks away, so it made sense to contact them instead. Paul doesn't hear any more about the situation until he calls Gabby back the next day, who says that Lauren never ended up coming home. By this point it was the 20th of June, so Lauren's sister heads to the local police department to ask for a welfare check to be done. When the police arrive at Lauren's apartment, they report that there was no answer at the door, but they did see someone in there and they didn't have probable cause to break in. The family were concerned, but that concern seemed to hit its peak the next day on the 21st of June. This was Father's Day and Lauren and Paul were close. When she didn't contact him to wish him a good day, that seriously set alarm bells ringing. Lauren's sister asked Victor to check in on Lauren, but he was hesitant to do so, and it later transpired that he told Gabby not to call the police. Lauren had been missing for 48 hours at this point, and her boyfriend hadn't alerted the authorities. It's also probably worth mentioning at this point in the story that Gabby and Victor were close friends. They worked together even before him and Lauren were together, it seems. Although I don't think they met through Victor. Eventually, at Paul's insistence, on the 21st, Gabby does officially file a missing persons report, but it took some persuasion. You can probably guess what I'm going to say next though. The police said there was nothing they could do. A couple of days later, with the police still doing nothing, Lauren's sister Lindsay goes and gets a spare key for the apartment off of her mother. There's a very strange situation with the key here, in that it seems that this key was actually Gabby's, who had given it up a couple of days after Lauren's disappearance, saying that he didn't want to deal with it. He essentially moved out their shared apartment, it seems, and gave the key to Anne. After they got hold of the key, Lindsay, her fiancé Matt and Cassie headed to the apartment to see if they could find anything questionable, but they didn't. Everything was exactly as it should have been, except that Lauren was nowhere to be seen. It didn't look like a crime scene, nor did it look like Lauren had packed up anything to go away. The only questionable thing they found was a dead phone that wouldn't turn on next to Lauren's bed. They picked up the phone with the intention of giving it to the police when an actual investigation started. Strangely, whilst they were there, Gabby turned up to pick up his TV. They asked him about the dead phone, to which Gabby disappeared inside with it and returned with another phone, a working phone. He said that the working phone was Lauren's, and her sisters soon confirmed this to be the case. It was logged onto her Facebook and email. But they did keep both phones to give to investigators when needed. It seems that Lauren had lost her phone earlier in June. That day she took a swim in the lake at Four Freedoms Park before she was Baker acted. So this new phone she was using was one of Gabby's old ones, and she'd only been using it since the 8th of June when she was released from the Baker Act, and therefore it only had about 10 days worth of usage. Finally, on the 24th of June, the police department assigned a detective to her case. A detective, Nick Jones, who was claimed to have found every missing person he's ever been assigned to, except for Lauren up to this point. The reason it took so long to get a detective assigned to her case was due to a clerical error apparently that had been made whilst filing the missing persons report. Major crimes investigators weren't made aware of the case as quickly as they should have been. As soon as this error was corrected, the police sent an alert about Lauren's disappearance to the media, who began to spread the words. On June 24, 2020, Cape Coral Police released a missing endangered person alert at 1:25 p.m. after Detective Jones marked her case as missing and endangered. Soon, divers searched the lake at the park, but Lauren was still not found. The investigation into Lauren's disappearance would come with many twists and turns. 10 days after her disappearance, investigators would announce that someone had actually found Lauren's black handbag at Four Freedoms Park on the 19th of June and had handed it over to them. This was the same bag she'd been carrying as she was applying for jobs the day before. But not only was her bag found, next to it were her apartment keys and shoes. We don't know how much money Lauren had on her on the day she disappeared, so we can't say for sure if anything was stolen from inside the bag, but inside was her purse with her ID, which is how they knew who the bag belonged to. And then another few days later, on the 2nd of July, Lauren's family were searching the Four Freedoms Park again, as they've been doing daily since the disappearance. Her family were dedicated to doing whatever they could to find information, and Victor had flown in and so had Cassie. They retraced Lauren's daily walk each day from her apartment to the park, which they searched every inch of. Not only this, but they went to the bus station, they spoke to people in the streets and local neighbourhoods, they visited shops. Anything they could do to help find Lauren, they did it. Which is why it was incredibly strange when that day they spotted Lauren's burgundy shirt in the sand at the park by the waterline. They'd searched this park every single day. They'd looked in this spot several times, and this shirt had not been there before. It was almost as if it had been planted for them to find. This struck them as incredibly strange, as it would do. They'd searched this park so many times, they'd searched this area so many times, and I assume investigators had as well. But this shirt hadn't been there before. It wasn't wet or dirty at all, like it had been washed up from the water, and it was definitely Lauren's shirt. It was in her size and it was one of her favourites. Her sister was even with her at the mall the day she bought it, and there were photographs of Lauren wearing it, and the maintenance worker remembered seeing her that morning in a burgundy shirt, if he's to be believed. Investigators were obviously called to the park to collect the shirt and inspect the area for any other evidence, and it was confirmed that they were trying to pull CCTV footage from the park to see when and how the shirt got there. Apparently there was a camera right on that area. But if investigators managed to glean any information from this, it's never been publicly released. It was after this point that the media really started to pick up on Lauren's story. As sad as it is, the media's just not interested in a woman who's just disappeared. That happens all the time. But they are interested in a mysterious disappearance where her belongings are seemingly appearing out of nowhere in locations which have already been searched. This was what the investigation needed. Public awareness, more people aware of Lauren's face, more eyes looking out for her. From there, a public search is organised for Freedoms Park on the 7th of July, and a reward for any information is raised to $5,000. Interestingly, Gabby, Victor and Anne don't turn up to help with the search. A couple more weeks pass with no movement in the case, and on the 20th of July a cadaver dog search takes place. The outcome of this search would be interesting to say the least. The search would begin at the park, the centre of this investigation, and the dogs would waste no time in leading the handlers across the road directly to the maroon cargo work van shared by Victor and Gabby, which is parked outside Victor and Anne's apartment. I've already mentioned that Victor and Gabby worked together, but they worked for a local flooring company, where one of their main jobs was tearing up carpets and other flooring and removing them. The dogs led to the back of the van, and one of them even laid down in the corner, a sure sign that dogs found something. However, it is worth mentioning that Victor and Gabby often transported carpet in the van from a number of different houses which had seen any number of things, including death. Cadaver dogs are trained to sniff out the chemicals associated with death, and this potentially could have been an explanation for what was found, or maybe not. After they alerted to the van, the dogs followed their scent trail all the way up to Anne and Victor's apartment, which was subsequently searched by investigators. Then the dogs led to a storage area out the back of the apartment block. A number of items were taken to a lab for testing, including the van, but the van was soon released back to Victor and Gabby for the reasons I mentioned just a moment ago. If anything of interest was ever found here, this information has never been released to the public. And then, in a very strange turn of events, the owner of the company Victor and Gabby worked for committed suicide in a hotel room just 2 days later. This may have been completely unrelated to Lauren's disappearance because this man had his own problems, but some people question the timing here, especially as he is one of the only people who could have confirmed Victor and Gabby's work schedule. Apparently they came back from work late on the Thursday night before Lauren reportedly disappeared. I do want to stress again here that the accepted date that Lauren disappeared is Friday the 19th of June 2020. But this timeline is going by the fact that Gabby says he saw Lauren that morning, the maintenance man saying he'd seen her walking back towards her apartment, and the last outgoing call on her phone being at 10 AM that morning also. But Lauren's family do question this, as none of them heard anything from her that day. The last they heard from her was on the Thursday evening, the 18th. Over the coming weeks, Lauren's case would seem to gain traction in the local and national media. On the 4th of August, her case was featured on Dateline's Missing in America, whilst community searches were still ongoing in Cape Coral. The locals in Cape Coral are not about to give up on finding Lauren, and neither are her family, who are doing every interview they can to bring awareness. Months passed with no advances in the case, so on the 3rd of October, Lauren's Angels, a group of people dedicated to finding her, organised a We Ride for Lauren event, motorcyclists riding across Cape Coral to raise awareness and donations. The police department even closed streets for the ride to take place. It was a community effort and they managed to raise about $6,000, which was incredible. But there were mixed emotions in the family, as in mid-September, Anne had been found incoherent on the floor of her bathroom at home and had been rushed to the hospital. Anne had likely been there all day and was found in the evening by Jeffrey. She was determined to have had a urinary tract infection that had gone septic and was taken straight to the ICU. Anne wasn't lucid at this time. She was drifting in and out of consciousness and was living in the past, it seemed. When Jeffrey one day started to speak to his mother about the day he'd found her on the floor, she said that she was okay. She'd been with Lauren. Obviously intrigued, he pushed her for more information, to which Anne said she knew Lauren was missing. He asked her where Lauren was, who she was with, to which Anne replied, Michael. Nobody really knows any Michael involved in the story, but Anne didn't elaborate any further. Clearly she wasn't in a mentally competent state at the time, and nobody knew whether she was making things up, if she was confused or knew what she was talking about. Anne never quite got better in hospital. She got pneumonia and deteriorated over the next few weeks. Due to Anne's condition, her family limited visitors to family only, which excluded Victor as the two of them were not married. Despite this, somebody actually managed to get into the hospital posing as Lindsay on the day of the We Ride for Lauren event, somebody who clearly knew that the family would be preoccupied that day. The hospital said that whoever this woman was had not signed in, and they never gave over any surveillance footage in order to provide the family with any answers. It turns out that whoever this mysterious woman was probably ended up giving Anne COVID. Nobody else on the floor had COVID, none of her other visitors, none of the nurses, as far as everyone was aware. Likelihood is it was the mysterious visitor. This would be the final straw for Anne, who had been deteriorating in hospital for weeks. She sadly died on the 15th of October. The whole situation around Anne's rather sudden death added another layer to the mystery. Nothing about it made any sense. But it turns out that someone else had actually been in Anne and Victor's house on the day that Anne was found on the floor of her bathroom. The very same maintenance man who had potentially been the last person to see Lauren, or so he says. This story does come word of mouth. Paul heard it from some friends and then he relayed it to the Complicit podcast. Essentially, it goes something like this. The maintenance man ran into some of Paul's friends outside the apartment block the day after Anne was taken to hospital. They asked him if he'd heard about what had happened to Anne, and the maintenance man said yes. He said he'd been in the apartment the day before and had actually seen Anne in an unresponsive state in the bathroom. Apparently he was in the apartment to fix something and needed the toilet, but when he opened the door, Anne was on the toilet with her head bowed. He called out to her, and when she didn't respond, he assumed she was praying, so he left and locked the door behind him. When he was later questioned by a family member as to why he didn't do anything to help, why he didn't call an ambulance or even Victor, he didn't have an answer. See, I told you there are so many twists and turns in this story. It's like a puzzle, but you're missing half the pieces. To hear everyone's first-hand accounts surrounding this part of the story, I'd recommend listening to episode 6 of the podcast. And just to add the cherry on top of the cake, it turns out that the maintenance man and Gabby had actually at one point lived within 12 miles of each other in Racine, Wisconsin. Now this could potentially be a huge coincidence, of course, but it is strange. It's now been 11 months, almost a whole year since Lauren's disappearance, and her loved ones are showing no signs of letting up in their search for her. They are determined to find out what happened, and as you may be able to tell, there's no shortage of suspects in their eyes. This case is an intricate web of linked people and clues, but nothing quite makes sense. Although I do have hope that one day soon someone will come forward with a piece of information that links everything together. But until that point, all we can do is raise awareness, spread her story, ensure Lauren is not forgotten. Of course, I would highly recommend you go and listen to the Complicit podcast for even more detail and interviews with friends, family members and others involved in the investigation. But also go and join the Bring Lauren DeMolo Home page on Facebook, which I'll also link down below. That's probably the best way to stay as up to date on this case as possible. As of today, Detective Nick Jones is still leading the investigation, which still categorises Lauren as missing and endangered, and it remains open and active. Searches continue to be conducted by the Cape Coral PD, and community organised searches are also frequently organised by family members and friends in the area. If you happen to live near Cape Coral and would be interested in joining one of the searches or helping out, then check out the events page on the Complicit podcast website. As you've gathered, there is no shortage of potential suspects in Lauren's disappearance, but at least as far as the police have revealed, there are no actual suspects. They're following many leads but won't release the names of any persons of interest in this case. Detective Jones said to NBC2.com in January that every detective in his unit has interviewed multiple people and there isn't any one person he wouldn't rule out right now. Obviously, a lot of people suspect Gabby, and it's worth noting that he has spoken to investigators and has taken a polygraph test. Gabby said to NBC, "I don't need to be nervous because I really didn't, I don't know anything." He's also said that she wasn't using drugs at the time and wouldn't harm herself, to which her family agrees. Although I don't know if they so much agree that he had nothing to do with her disappearance. Cassie has said that investigators don't believe that Lauren harmed herself and they don't believe that she ran away. They're investigating as if she was taken against her will. Lauren's loved ones insist that despite her problems, it was unlike her to just disappear and not say anything. She wouldn't have done that to them, but especially she wouldn't have done that to her daughter. She was doing everything she possibly could to get custody again. Her daughter was her entire world. She wouldn't have just given up and disappeared. In November 2020, Paul hired a private investigator called Walt Zalisco to look into Lauren's case with a fresh perspective. Her family just want answers, closure. If anyone has any information, they can contact the Cape Coral PD or send the police a message through their social media platforms or call Crime Stoppers, the details for which will be linked down below. This case only happened 11 months ago, less than a year. We all know that cases have been solved much later in the day than that, and this is a fairly fresh case, so I have no doubt new information and new leads will come out over the coming months, especially as more platforms begin to share Lauren's name and her story. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. If there's anything you want to do to help, then of course everything will be linked down below, or even if you just want to share her story, tell more people about her, especially if you live in the Florida area, specifically near or around Cape Coral. Bye guys.